Back in November, Disney changed CEOs. They went from firing their current CEO at the time, which was Bob Chapek. They went back to Bob Iger, who had been CEO of the company for the 15 years before Bob Chapek had been CEO. And now Bob Iger's running the company. And I'm going to argue if you're going to make the switch back to Bob Iger, for the reasons that we'll discuss shortly here in this video, then you could easily justify paying that guy $250 million, $500 million, maybe even $1 billion to run Disney. And I'll explain why. First, let's go through a little history of how we got here. Bob Iger was the CEO of Disney from 2005 through February of 2020. So right as the pandemic is starting to hit, Bob Iger retires from his CEO seat. And in comes Bob Chapek, who happens to be Bob Iger's hand-chosen successor. Bob Chapek runs the company from February of 2020 until just this past November. There was a Sunday in November, in fact, Sunday night, where the board came out and said, basically, Bob Chapek's done. We've dismissed the guy. We're going back to Bob Iger to run the company, hoping for best of luck from here, sort of thing. It's pretty wild to think about. Bob Iger has a 15-year run as CEO. Bob Chapek has less than a 3-year run as CEO, and already the board wants to go back to the previous guy. Now, Bob Chapek, the stock had fallen about 30% over his run as CEO. Like I said, a lot of that has to do with the pandemic. When you have a pandemic that hits the way this one hit, and theme park attendance goes the way it goes because you have to close the parks and you can't have all the public gatherings, then of course Disney stock is going to get hit pretty badly through all that. And so Bob Chapek owns all that because he's the CEO. So his record doesn't look that good on its face. What's interesting, though, is of all the countless people, the high-profile executives that have worked at Disney over the years, the high-profile executives that would love, it would be their dream job to go run the company, none of those people is selected to run Disney. Like I said, the board goes back to Bob Iger to have him run the company, and he's 71 years old today, which is quite old when it comes to publicly traded company CEOs. So it's a pretty interesting twist that the board would look back to Bob Iger in this circumstance. So what exactly happened to Bob Chapek? How did he have a less than 3-year run? We still don't know a lot of the details, but it's pretty clear that he lost the confidence of his chief financial officer, the CFO. And when it comes to publicly traded companies, and I'll argue basically almost any company, the most important relationship inside of a company is the relationship between the CEO and the CFO. There's probably going to be some tension there, and that's not unhealthy at all. And in fact, it could be quite good to have that sort of tension where a CFO is much more reality-based, in the moment, focused on the existing financial performance of the enterprise. The CEO tends to be more forward-looking, tends to be more of a strategist, more interested in placing bets. And so the CFO can be a nice counterweight to the CEO in that kind of circumstance. In this case, at Disney, like I said, Bob Chapek just lost the confidence of the CFO. There's a bunch of reasons why. One important one is Disney has its streaming business that's nominally headlined by the Disney Plus service. And that business is not profitable. Its biggest competitor is Netflix, and Netflix is profitable. So you have a situation where Disney's streaming business, which is in a sense a bet the future of the company around what we can do in this space, is not going very well. It's not profitable. The costs are increasing pretty dramatically, and it's not clear when that segment will be profitable. You combine that with some continued struggles on the theme park side, and Bob Chapek is doomed. And unfortunately, as a publicly traded CEO, when you lose the confidence of your CFO, that can be an imperiling event for you. Because like many companies, at Disney, the CFO has pretty serious relationships with the board. That's largely what CFOs do, since they're responsible for earnings calls, they're responsible for managing investor relations. They have a very important role to play in reporting up to the board about the performance of the company and what's at stake and what the future expectations look like. So when your CFO loses confidence in you, and the CFO has been the CFO for a while, predated Bob Chapek's term as CEO, the CFO can go to the board and have conversations and be like, look, we don't have the right guy in charge of this thing, and we need to do something different if we're going to perform the way that all of you and all of our shareholders expect us to perform. And a little bit of conversation on that front, combined with a few quarters in a row of subpar results, and the board can build up some urgency around making a change. And that appears to be what happened with Bob Chapek. So what really happened here? What was the root cause? Was it the case that Bob Chapek just isn't a good CEO, or is he not a good CEO of Disney? And again, the question gets pretty complex, but I think what's clear, and has been clear even before Bob Chapek became CEO, is Disney has struggled mightily when it comes to succession. When it comes to moving on from Bob Iger, there's just never been a whole lot of commitment to who the next person in line will be. There were multiple executives through Bob Iger's tenure that chose to leave the company, frankly, because they felt like the CEO position was not going to be open, certainly to them, but maybe open to anyone. There were many times where Bob Iger was talking about and planning a retirement, and then kind of at the last minute, he signs a new employment contract that extends his term as CEO. I had taken it, even while Bob Iger was being CEO, I had taken it as a failure of leadership, both from Bob Iger and from the board at Disney. That if you have this massive enterprise where there is no shortage of talented folks that are looking to build their careers at Disney, and you can't find a single one of them to competently run the business, that's a failure. There's plenty of talent out there. Disney is a very complex business. There are more complex businesses to run. And the fact that the board seems to be addicted to Bob Iger, and in a sense, Bob Iger may be addicted to this job, it's a real challenge for the company. Because again, how do you cultivate this sort of leadership progression that you need in order to sustain excellence when you rely on a single individual as much as you do? And that gets me to Bob Iger's compensation. When the board brought him back in November of 22 to be CEO again, they agreed to pay him $25 million a year to come back and be the CEO. I will argue you could easily 10x that compensation. You could pay that guy $250 million. You could pay him $500 million. You could even pay the guy $1 billion a year, I would argue, and justify it, given how the Disney board has played this to this point. Effectively, they're saying there is only one human being on the planet that can run Disney. There's only been one human being on the planet since 2005 that can capably run Disney, and that's Bob Iger. As I'm recording this video, Disney has a market capitalization of north of $150 billion. So if you argue that Bob Iger is so capable that he can generate a single percentage point of extra return, that would be $1.5 billion of extra return a year, then you could really justify paying him up to that amount. That's the incremental value that Disney shareholders are seeing by bringing Bob Iger back. The 1% number is just a rough rule of thumb. You could actually try to compute what do you think the excess return to Disney was over the 15 years that Bob Iger was CEO. But I'm just saying, rough rule of thumb, call it 1%, which may be conservative. You could justify paying the guy $1 billion a year. Now, I do think it's pretty absurd, right? Because there's plenty of talented folks that want to become the CEO of Disney, that have built incredible skill sets, have incredible ambition and energy and commitment and affection for that company. And yet the board simply will not choose any of them to be the CEO. So if you're going to choose Iger the way you've chosen him, and if he's going to come back the way he's going to come back, I think you could easily justify paying the guy $1 billion a year. And I think it's pretty interesting that Bob Iger didn't insist on anything more than $25 million a year. $25 million a year is a massive amount of money. I get it. But when you know you're the only guy that the board would choose, that you're the only one they trust, you could demand so much higher. And the fact that he didn't, I think, makes me believe that he's pretty addicted to that role, much like the board is addicted to him. So it's an understandable predicament, but it's very scary for Disney. It's scary for their shareholders to rely so much on a single human being. I believe it's a failure of Bob Iger to capably develop a successor. It's a failure of the board to find and cultivate and invest in successors for these senior leadership positions. I don't think it's going to turn out all that well for Disney, but maybe Bob Iger could put on his cape and be Superman once again. We'll see from here. But it'll be an interesting road to hoe for him and that leadership team. A lot of turbulence, and not knowing who's going to show up and help out next puts a lot of added stress on that company. So thanks for watching. I appreciate it. If you liked the video, click the like button, click subscribe. I will see you next time.